Ethan Marlowe had always believed that a change of scenery could mend what routine quietly damaged, so when Rowan Hale suggested a weekend trip, he agreed almost immediately. The idea sounded simple enough, 4 friends escaping work, noise, and the usual gravitational pull of their personal problems. Yet as Ethan zipped his bag shut on that Friday afternoon, he couldn't escape the sense that the trip might reveal more than it repaired. Caleb Dorian, Ethan's boyfriend for nearly 2 years, stood by the doorway scrolling on his phone, his brow furrowed with an expression Ethan no longer knew how to read. "You packed already?" Caleb asked without looking up. "Just finished," Ethan replied. He waited for Caleb to meet his eyes, but the moment never arrived. Instead, Caleb slipped the phone into his pocket and said, "Rowan's outside. Miles is with him." Then he left the room, leaving behind the faint echo of distance Ethan had grown accustomed to. Rowan Hale greeted Ethan with a warm grin the moment he stepped outside. His forest green jacket contrasted against his copper hair, and his easy confidence created a natural gravity around him. Miles Carter, Rowan's boyfriend, stood beside him, quiet, dependable, and always scanning the surroundings as if interpreting an unspoken language. "You ready for this escape?" Rowan asked, patting Ethan's shoulder with an energy that felt genuine, grounding. Ethan smiled. "You say that like we're running from something. Aren't we all?" Rowan joked, but a flicker of seriousness passed through his amber eyes. The 4 piled into Rowan's SUV, with Rowan driving, Miles in the front, and Ethan and Caleb settling in the back. As the city faded behind them, Rowan played a playlist full of soft indie tracks and mellow instrumentals. Miles occasionally hummed along, and Rowan tapped the steering wheel in rhythm. Ethan watched them from the back seat, noticing how easily they seemed to move in unison. Caleb, in contrast, stared out the window, his phone buzzing every now and then in his pocket. Each vibration tightened a knot in Ethan's stomach. He wanted to ask who was messaging him, but he couldn't bring himself to sound suspicious. "Not yet." Instead, he said lightly, "You good?" Caleb nodded. "Just work stuff." Ethan wanted to believe him. The drive lasted almost 3 hours, winding through open fields and narrow forest roads as the light shifted from afternoon gold to the soft gray of early evening. Conversation ebbed and flowed, Rowan recounting funny stories from his job at a local studio, Miles offering understated but insightful comments, Ethan contributing when he could. Caleb remained mostly quiet, though he chimed in whenever Rowan asked him something directly. As the SUV approached the hotel, an older but well-kept building nestled beside a stretch of pine trees, Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders ease. The architecture was simple, warm lanterns hanging near the entrance, a stone pathway leading toward a rustic lobby, and a faint scent of cedar drifting through the air. Inside, a friendly receptionist apologized immediately. "We only have 2 rooms left tonight," she said. 2 double beds and 1 queen. I can offer a small discount since it's last minute." Rowan glanced at the others. "We can split it normally. Ethan and I share 1 room, Caleb and Miles the other." "Makes sense." Ethan nodded. Caleb shrugged as if the arrangement didn't matter. Miles simply agreed, though Ethan caught the way his eyes flicked toward Rowan briefly, as if silently hoping for more closeness. They collected the keys and headed upstairs. The hallway was long and dimly lit, the carpet a faded maroon that softened their footsteps. Ethan and Rowan's room sat at the very end, overlooking the quiet parking lot. Rowan tossed his bag on the bed nearest the window. "Hope you don't mind this one," he said. "I like waking up to the light." "I don't mind," Ethan replied. He placed his bag on the other bed and took a moment to look around. The room was simple but cozy, cream-colored walls, a small wooden desk, and a vintage lamp with a warm glow. Rowan stretched, his voice dropping into a more relaxed register. "Feels good to be away for a bit." "Yeah," Ethan agreed, though his mind still lingered on Caleb's distant demeanor during the drive. Rowan caught the hesitation. "You two all right?" Ethan considered pretending everything was fine, but Rowan's sincerity made lying feel pointless. "We're not great," he admitted. "He's been different lately. Hard to pinpoint why." Rowan sat on the edge of his bed, resting his elbows on his knees. "Relationships go through phases. Maybe this trip will help. Ethan appreciated Rowan's optimism, even if he didn't share it. He had always admired Rowan's ability to see the best in difficult situations. It was one of the traits Ethan had tried too hard not to admire. Before the conversation could deepen, a soft knock came at the door. Miles peeked in, leaning slightly into the frame. "We're thinking of grabbing dinner downstairs. You two joining?" Rowan stood. "Yeah. Give us a sec." Miles nodded politely and disappeared down the hallway. Ethan took a breath. "Let's go. Maybe food will help me reset." The dining area was warm, decorated with framed photos of lakes and trails that hinted at a more vibrant tourist season. They ordered simple meals: pasta, soup, grilled vegetables. Conversation flowed easily, mostly led by Rowan's humor and Miles's gentle commentary, but Ethan couldn't ignore the way Caleb kept checking his phone under the table, the screen lighting his face in brief, ghostly flashes. Each time it buzzed, Caleb's expression hardened, as though he were bracing himself for something. Rowan noticed too. Ethan saw it in the subtle narrowing of his eyes. When dinner ended, they returned to their rooms. Miles wished everyone a good night and disappeared into the room he shared with Caleb. Ethan and Rowan walked back to theirs in silence, not out of tension, but out of a shared sense of awareness. Neither wanted to speak aloud yet. Inside the room, Rowan dimmed the lamp and sat back on his bed, exhaling slowly. "It's been a long day." Ethan nodded. "Longer than I expected." They talked for a short while, about work, memories from their college years, small hopes for the coming months. Rowan spoke with a sincerity that always seemed to steady Ethan. At one point, Rowan said, "You're quieter tonight. More than usual." Ethan hesitated before answering. "I'm trying to figure out what I'm feeling. Everything's complicated." Rowan didn't push. He simply nodded, offering calm presence instead of questions. As the light softened and the room grew still, Ethan realized how comfortable the quiet felt when he was with Rowan. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't demanding. It simply existed, like something waiting to be acknowledged. Eventually, Rowan lay back on his bed, his voice a gentle murmur. "Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow might be clearer." Ethan switched off the lamp. The room settled into darkness, but sleep didn't come quickly. Thoughts tangled in his mind: Caleb's distance, Rowan's steadiness, and the unsettling instinct that the night marked the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. Yet even as uncertainty pressed in, Ethan felt a strange, cautious anticipation that he didn't know why. Not yet, but the feeling stayed, and it refused to be ignored. The morning after the storm was unnervingly still. The mountains wore a fresh layer of mist, and the air outside the cabin smelled clean, too clean, as though the night before had been washed away. Ethan woke to silence, broken only by the slow crackle of new firewood and the faint sound of water dripping from the roof. His head felt heavy, not from wine, but from everything that had gone unsaid. Caleb stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost casual, but something beneath it had changed. His voice when he spoke was soft, careful. "You sleep at all?" Ethan shook his head. "Barely." Caleb handed him a mug. "Yeah. Me neither." They sat across from each other, separated by the narrow table that suddenly felt like a chasm. The quiet wasn't comfortable this time. It was thick, weighted with what they hadn't done but almost had. Ethan stared into his cup, the rising steam blurring his reflection. He wanted to say something, apologize, explain, retreat, but no words fit. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "We should probably head back before the roads ice over." Ethan nodded, grateful for the practicality of the statement. "Yeah. Let's do that." They packed in silence. Every small sound, the zip of a bag, the creak of the floorboards, the closing of drawers, felt exaggerated, like punctuation in a conversation neither wanted to finish. When Caleb brushed past him to grab his jacket, Ethan's heart jumped despite himself. The nearness hurt more than the distance ever could. Before leaving, Ethan stepped outside for air. The sky was pale, the valley below hidden under slow-moving fog. He closed his eyes, letting the cold bite at his skin. He told himself this would fade, that time and reason would erase the sharpness of what had almost happened. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. Some moments refused to dissolve. Caleb came out behind him. "You ready?" Ethan nodded without turning around. "Yeah." The drive down the mountain was quiet. The winding roads felt endless, and each curve brought a new kind of tension, the kind that comes from knowing silence is safer than truth. Caleb focused on the road, his jaw tight, knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Ethan watched the landscape blur past, trees melting into shades of gray and green. He wanted to say something that could make the air lighter, but everything that came to mind felt dishonest. Halfway down, Caleb finally spoke. "You don't have to hate me for last night." Ethan turned to him. "I don't." Caleb's eyes stayed on the road. "Then what do you feel?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Confused. Guilty. Maybe both." "About me?" "About everything." Caleb gave a faint nod, almost to himself. "I didn't plan it, you know." "I know." Ethan paused. "That doesn't make it easier." They drove the rest of the way in silence. By the time they reached the highway, the sun had climbed above the trees, melting what little snow remained. The world looked ordinary again, and that felt like a lie. When Caleb dropped him off at his apartment, he didn't kill the engine. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't move to leave. For a long moment, they sat in stillness. Caleb broke it first. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "You too." He stepped out, closed the door, and stood on the curb as the truck pulled away. The sound of its tires faded into city noise until it was gone entirely. For the first time in days, Ethan felt utterly alone. Inside, Ryan was home early. He looked up from the couch, smiling with that easy familiarity Ethan had always found comforting. "Hey, you're back sooner than I thought. How was it?" Ethan managed a smile. "Peaceful." Ryan stood, stretching, then crossed over to hug him. "You needed it." Ethan let himself be held, but it felt strange, like fitting into a shape that no longer matched perfectly. Ryan smelled like coffee and cedar soap, the same as always. Nothing had changed here, and that was the problem. As the evening went on, Ryan talked about work, about a project deadline, about weekend plans. Ethan listened, nodding at the right moments, pretending everything was fine. But part of him still lingered in that cabin, by the fire, in the sound of rain, in Caleb's voice whispering truths neither could bear to hold. Later that night, while Ryan slept, Ethan sat by the window with his phone. One unread message glowed on the screen. "Caleb, I didn't plan it. But I don't regret feeling something real." Ethan's thumb hovered over the delete button. He didn't reply. Instead, he locked the screen and set the phone face down. But the words stayed, echoing like a heartbeat. He stared out at the city lights scattered across the dark. It was strange how easily life resumed, how routine could disguise turmoil. Yet inside, a quiet storm still moved. Guilt pressed at him, but beneath it lay something harder to name, a longing not for what happened, but for what it revealed. He wondered what it said about him, that a single weekend could shake years of certainty. That a glance, a touch, a near mistake could make him question what he thought he knew about love and loyalty. By midnight, the room had gone completely still. Ryan shifted in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Ethan watched him, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the trust in his unguarded face. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but couldn't. The space felt sacred now, something he wasn't sure he had the right to cross. When dawn approached, pale and thin, Ethan still hadn't slept. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, and stood by the window as the first light touched the skyline. His reflection looked older, quieter, changed in ways no one would notice. He thought of the mountains, of how they seemed eternal from afar, but up close, every surface told a story of erosion, of weather, of time reshaping even the strongest stone. Maybe people weren't so different. Caleb would fade, he told himself. The memory would dull, the guilt would soften. But part of him knew better. Some stories don't end, they just become quieter versions of themselves, hidden in the folds of ordinary life. Ethan took a slow breath and whispered to the empty room, "The mountains keep secrets." Then, almost to himself, softer still, "So do I." He set the mug down, straightened his posture, and turned toward the day waiting for him, but as the sunlight broke across the room, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted for good, and that the silence he carried from that cabin would follow him long after everything else had been forgotten. Ethan barely slept that night. The ache in his stomach had dulled slightly, but the tension in his chest remained unyielding, a persistent drumbeat of worry that refused to be silenced. Each time he closed his eyes, he pictured Julian, imagining the subtle hesitations in his partner's gaze, the way his phone seemed to demand attention that Ethan wasn't meant to see. It was irrational, he told himself. Trust, after all, was the foundation of their relationship, but the seed of suspicion had already taken root, growing quietly in the darkness. By morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting the apartment in pale gold. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, his mind elsewhere. He had called Dr. Harper Willis to discuss follow-up results, and the doctor had scheduled another round of tests. But while the appointment would provide clarity about his health, it could not untangle the knot of unease forming around Julian. Ethan had always been introspective, sensitive to the subtleties of human behavior, and now those instincts screamed warnings he was reluctant to acknowledge. Julian arrived home later than usual, carrying a canvas bag filled with groceries, a casual smile playing on his lips. Yet, Ethan noted the tension in his shoulders, the slight avoidance of eye contact when he entered the apartment. He wondered if Julian sensed Ethan's growing wariness, or if it was simply a reflection of his own anxiety magnifying every movement, every word. The couple exchanged greetings, polite and measured, but Ethan felt a distance that had not existed before, a subtle fracture in their shared space. Ethan tried to focus on mundane tasks, unpacking groceries, arranging fruit on the counter, rinsing dishes, but his mind kept returning to the message he had glimpsed yesterday, the one that had seemed innocuous in daylight but now felt heavy with implication. The desire to understand, to uncover the truth, grew stronger with each passing hour. He remembered conversations with his best friend, Noah Sinclair, who had always been a voice of reason, and he wondered if reaching out might provide guidance or simply add fuel to the fire of his own speculation. Eventually, the temptation became too great. While Julian was in the bedroom, humming softly as he tidied a shelf, Ethan picked up his partner's phone. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it as casual curiosity. The screen lit up, displaying a string of encrypted messages he could only partially decipher, the words vague yet undeniably intimate. There were plans, references to meetings, and a tone that suggested secrecy rather than transparency. Ethan's stomach tightened, not from the physical ache that had driven him to the clinic, but from a deep, visceral sense of betrayal. Memories flashed unbidden, laughter shared on weekends, the warmth of Julian's hand in his own, quiet nights watching films in their living room. Those moments contrasted sharply with the creeping uncertainty that now invaded Ethan's perception of his relationship. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now carried the weight of doubt. He tried to rationalize, to remind himself that assumptions could be misleading, yet the evidence before him was enough to stir a storm of emotions he could neither fully control nor ignore. Throughout the day, Ethan oscillated between confronting Julian and attempting to suppress his suspicions. The ache in his stomach had transformed, merging with anxiety and worry, forming a physical echo of his inner turmoil. Dr. Willis's voice replayed in his mind, subtle hints that stress and emotional strain could manifest physically. Perhaps this was the truth. Perhaps the body's rebellion was a reflection of unspoken truths pressing against him, demanding recognition. Ethan found himself pacing the apartment, restless, unable to commit to either confrontation or denial. He called Noah Sinclair, who suggested patience, careful observation, and emotional self-care. "You need clarity, Ethan," Noah said, voice steady. "But you also need to protect yourself emotionally. Don't rush into something that could hurt you more than it already has." Ethan listened, nodding silently, appreciating the guidance yet feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing on his chest. As evening descended, the city outside his window shifted from golden hues to deep blues, streetlights flickering like distant stars. Ethan's anxiety had not diminished, if anything, it had sharpened. He could no longer ignore the signs, the inconsistencies in Julian's behavior, the secretive tone of his messages. Each small revelation acted as a magnifying glass, focusing his attention on what he feared to confront. He realized that avoiding the truth would not provide peace, it would only prolong the torment and uncertainty. Finally, Ethan decided to speak to Julian, though the exact words remained elusive in his mind. He observed his partner from the living room, noting the casual ease in Julian's movements, the faint smile as he hummed, unaware of the storm brewing silently in Ethan's gaze. Ethan's thoughts raced, how to approach this without confrontation turning into conflict. How to seek truth without destroying what they had. The questions hung in the air, unspoken yet pressing, shaping the tension in every corner of their shared apartment. Dr. Willis's call came later that evening. Ethan answered with a mix of hope and apprehension, the phone trembling slightly in his hand. The doctor's voice was calm, measured, yet hinted at concern. "Ethan, the test results show irregularities that may be related to stress and emotional strain," Dr. Willis explained. "I recommend a thorough follow-up, but it's important to address the underlying factors that might be contributing to your physical symptoms." Ethan's heart sank. The physical ailment was intertwined with emotional turbulence, a reality he had sensed but now faced with undeniable confirmation. By the time the call ended, Ethan felt an almost unbearable weight pressing on him. He sat on the couch, staring at the soft glow of the city lights, thinking about Julian, thinking about the encrypted messages, thinking about the doctor's warning. The ache in his stomach persisted, a stubborn reminder that his body and mind were intimately connected, that avoidance was no longer an option. He realized that he needed answers, not just for his health, but for the emotional truths that had begun to surface, threatening to unravel the foundation of his relationship. As he heard Julian moving in the bedroom, humming softly, Ethan's mind made a quiet, resolute decision. Tonight, he would seek clarity, confront the reality of his suspicions, and face whatever truths lay hidden behind familiar smiles and casual gestures. The tension was unbearable, yet it was also necessary, a crucible through which he would confront both betrayal and self-understanding. The night stretched ahead, fraught with uncertainty, and Ethan knew that what he discovered in the coming hours would change everything.